So moving on to the main theme of today, which is flexible working. Many of you will be aware this week is National Work Life Week, which aims to highlight the importance of embracing flexible working practices. We're hearing more and more about flexible working being good for businesses and being used as a tool to attract and retain staff. The Taylor Review of Modern Working Practices states that encouraging flexible working is good for everyone and has been shown to have a positive impact on productivity, employee retention and quality of work. I've pulled out some headlines for some recent news pieces. The first one is around a drop in rail season tickets that has fallen by 16.8% in the last 3 years. And rail bosses have attributed this to a decline in to a growing number of commuters working flexibly and therefore not going into the office 5 days a week. However, at the same time, a recent study has found that only 1 in 7 job adverts do offer flexible working, so it's an interesting landscape. At Morpay, we've actually recently conducted our own research to understand whether companies are giving employees the benefits they want. We sought the opinions of both employers and employees to find out, are employees looking for more than just a salary from their employer? How valued does the workforce feel? And which benefits would they prioritise as the most important to offer? Now, in terms of flexibility, our research found that beyond the top financial awards, as you can see here, it's flexibility that holds most appeal for SME employees. In fact, 4 of the top 8 most attractive benefits offer some form of flexibility or improvement to work-life balance. And our research also showed that women place significantly more importance than men on benefits that allow for flexibility, particularly flexible and remote working, which is cited by 35% of female employees, which compared to just 26% of male employees. So hopefully this provides you with some background to flexible working practices and the importance that both businesses and employees are placing on it. Before moving on to the main body of the presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about today's host, Carl Hardcastle. Carl is an employment law consultant at Morpay and works on our HR advice line, giving expert advice on every aspect of complex legislation businesses face. Carl is both legally and HR qualified and has over 20 years experience. He's worked at Morpay for over 9 years, specialising in redundancy, disciplinary and wider contentious employee relations. I'll now hand over to Carl, who will take you through the main presentation for embracing flexible working practices made easy. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to wish you a warm October welcome to Morpay's webinar. I'm keen just to reiterate what Hannah said previously about this being a two-way process. Yes, of course, there's got lots of slides ahead of you. And again, as Hannah said, please don't make notes. They're available after the webinar. But the two-way process thing is there is a chat box. At the end of this morning's webinar, there is a Q&A session. Every question will get answered, either live now on air, or alternatively, I can get back to you kind of offline if something's a bit sensitive or if something's a little bit that you don't want to discuss in public, or if we run out of time, needless to say, I'll get back to you on a one-on-one basis. So please make today a two-way process. Okay, all right, moving swiftly on today's agenda. As you can see, this morning we're going to discuss an overview of flexible working. What does it mean? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for your business? Second thing on the agenda, examples of flexible working arrangements. Nothing is ever set in stone nowadays. We've got sky-high rents, we've got rates. Sometimes if you can diversify your workforce, that's great. Sometimes you can't. We have a lot of clients from the hospitality industry, the care sector. Sometimes flexible working, as you can see it, is not right for you. But if you start to think about it, actually it can be. Can your staff go home early and do the paperwork at home? Again, we'll come on to that. Third of all, how to manage requests and reasons for refusal. The law is very, very tight around this. If you say, I don't want to allow a flexible working request because management don't like it or I don't like it, then you will possibly be acting outside of the law. So this morning I'd like to chat a little bit on how to manage the requests. You've certain statutory time limits to be hitting, and you've certain reasons you can refuse. Just saying, I don't want you to do it is not a reason. There's 8 of them, and we'll come on to them, and don't worry, I won't bore you too much. But there's 8 reasons, genuine reasons you can refuse, but we'll come on to those. There's a legal obligation an employee can request a flexible working pattern. You have a legal obligation to investigate, but there is no legal obligation to automatically, emphasize on the word automatically, to allow it. You can refuse. 8 reasons, more about that later. Okay, the next bullet point is relevant case law. Please don't panic. I will not be spending too long on this. A guaranteed cure for insomnia is case law. We're not going to go through it in any depth today. As I said previously, this is available via email. It can be sent to you. If you, like myself, are a bit of a nerd, you can go looking at this case law, but for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to be skimming over the top of it just to give you the headlines. Next bullet point, the business benefits of flexible working. It actually can be good for your business. I know you're thinking if I diversify my workforce, they're all going to be at home doing nothing. Again, I'll come on to it. I don't want to steal my own thunder. We can come on to the benefits of flexible working. Okay, a case study. I'm going to give a little bit of a practical example. Don't worry too much about that. What I'd rather do, rather than read through notes that are on your screen, I'd rather talk about things than get involved in just reading things out. And at that point, I think Hannah's going to pick up on this one. There's some payroll and time and attendance considerations to look about. I can look at the HR. I'll be looking at the employment law issues. I think Hannah's going to pick up on the payroll. So that's today's agenda. I'm aiming for this to be roughly about half an hour from now for the full time scale. I know you're all busy people with other things to do, so I'd like to run through it, but again, I'd like to give it the importance it deserves. It does have legal implications for your business, and it is vital that you treat it seriously, so I don't want to go into kind of no detail on this webinar and leave you all bereft. So, okay, Hannah, if we can skip on to the next screen, please.
Thanks, Carl.
Okay, first of all, those are genuinely some of my colleagues, so it's quite an unnerving experience to be them staring back at me. But there you go. This slide is to put it into context, first of all. The British workers are, on average, working the longest hours in the EU. So right now, the TUC, and I'm not going to get political, you may love them, you may loathe them, it may be somewhere in between. The TUC have published a report that says EU workers are doing, British workers are doing on average a 42-hour week, which is 2 years more than the UK average. You may think, well, that's fantastic, that's wonderful, we're harder workers than the Europeans, but the downside is we're less productive. Working long hours is great if you're productive, but if you're not productive, all you're doing is employing tired people. As you can see, some words I'm going to pick out there in the TUC General Secretary's Francis O'Grady's statement there. Overwork, stress and exhaustion. Reducing working hours isn't only good for workers, it can boost productivity. We do have clients that say to us, we do not want to employ poorly people. We don't want to employ tired people. Tired people make bad decisions. Tired people do the bare minimum, and that's not what you want from your workforce. So that's why we're looking at flexible working today. Okay, Hannah, if you can just skip it off a screen. Okay, first of all, as I mentioned in the agenda screen, we talked about what actually is flexible working. It is not just working from home. Flexible working can be done in many, many ways, and I'll work through this slide shortly. But before I do that, I think it's also important to mention that today is National Mental Health Day. So yes, I've got a lot of SME HR managers, a lot of business owners listening to this. I may have some employees as well, but if you work in a flexible way, you work in a way that fits around people's lifestyle, not only is it good for the business, but it can be good for individuals' mental health, and therefore if it's good for individuals' mental health, it can be good for business and productivity. So what is flexible working? let's look at the first headline there. It's a way that's going to suit an employee's needs. All employees have the legal right to request flexible working, and I'll come on to that as well. It's not just a nice, cuddly way of running your business. You have a statutory legal obligation to respect flexible working. There's no choice in that. It's not open to debate. It's there in law. You have to have a flexible working policy, a flexible working process, and that's locked down in law. It's interesting to note, though, your employees will have to work for you for at least 26 weeks before they're eligible to make a statutory request. So new starters, forget it. Once they've been there 26 weeks, or as you and I know it, 6 months, they have a legal right to make that flexible working request. And the final bullet point, and this is the important bullet point, any changes will be a permanent change to the employee's contract. There's no flipping about. You can't say, I want to work flexibly for the next 6 months and then my partner changes shifts and I want to work earlys, lates, mids. Absolutely not. If you agree a flexible working request, it's a permanent change. And I'll come on to that when I hit the second point of making a statutory request. First of all, requests must be made in writing. So if you have an employee that says, I want to work Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, the first thing you should be saying is, please put that in writing to me. Here at Morpay, we deal on the advice line, deal with lots of flexible working requests. The first thing we'll be saying is, put it in writing. We'll get a lot of he said, she said. If you end up in tribunal, work on the principle, if it's not written down, it never happened. And the second thing, only one request in a 12-month period. As I said previously, people can't flip and change. It is a permanent change to your employment contract. So if somebody comes to you and says, I'm struggling with healthcare, I'm struggling with childcare, therefore can I change my, my flexible working request? The answer is one request per 12 months. You can do more than that. You can say you're allowed to do more than that, but you're setting a dangerous precedent where all your staff will be knocking on your door every 5 minutes saying, I wish to change that. You can lock them out for 12 months, and that's the law. The next bullet point, employees must consider requests seriously. Yes, it is not a tick box exercise. If somebody comes to you and says, I wish to work flexibly, and you kind of do the tick box, invite them into a meeting, have an outcome letter, don't take it seriously, you have liability in tribunal. You're going to have to demonstrate that you've actually respected that request, investigated it thoroughly, and fed back appropriately. But first of all, and this can be a plus and a minus, the process must be completed within 3 months. Actually, this morning I was been speaking to a client that's in the process of selling their business. So therefore TUPE, and for those of you that HR professionals, that will be a word that maybe it gets you a little worried, but they're going to TUPE their staff out. So somebody's made a flexible working request. The business has in the process of being sold. So I've advised this morning, delay them a couple of months. It'll be out of your hands and somebody else will gather that liability. But the process must be completed within 3 months of the request. Okay, so let's move on to some examples of flexible working arrangements, please, Hannah. I can move it on, thank you. The first one, and this is the most obvious one, working from home. Employees that spend all of their week or some of their week working from home, first of all, you have an obligation that they work at 100% of their capability from home. I'm of a certain generation where working from home was a euphemism for not doing very much. Okay, so therefore, on Friday I'll be working from home, and that's a euphemism for I will be available, but I'll be doing the dishwasher and making the beds and making sure that the windows are clean. Okay, you can do that. If you agree staff that can work from home, please let them be accountable. We live in a modern world now where we've all got software and hardware that can account for an employee's productivity. Please use it. So the HR professionals that are out there at the moment, working from home should not mean a dip in productivity. If anything, because with nobody kind of hanging around your desk asking you questions about last night's TV, working from home should mean productivity. It should either stay the same or even increase. Compressed hours. What do we mean by that? Well, what you could do, instead of working a 5-day week, we have clients that have gone to, instead of a 4-day, a 5-day, 8-hour working week, they've gone to a 4-day, 10-hour working week. You can do that as long as you steer clear of the working time regulations, and that's a question we get asked a lot at the advice line. You are perfectly capable of doing that. So do you want to work your staff a little bit longer, but there again, 4 days a week rather than 5, or whatever shift pattern you feel is appropriate. Also, flexi time. A flexi start time, a flexi finish time with some core hours. You feel free to do that. That is determined by yourselves, by your HR department. We have some clients that are owned by American companies, some clients that are owned by Japanese companies, and often flexi time actually can load the emphasis on an early start time or a late start time, dependent on the need of the parent company. It can fit in for productivity. If you're owned by an American company, if you have staff that are starting at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning and are still there into the early evening, not only could it fit in with childcare, it could also fit in with your head office, their working hours. Also, part-time working. There's specialist laws around part-time working. You're not allowed to treat a part-timer worker differently than a full-timer when it comes to a detriment. But often what can happen is if you have a let-up in demand of your business, if you've staff wishing to work part-time, reduce their hours, it can be cheaper, and therefore away you go. And finally, job sharing. If you have, and we typically see this when it comes to maternity, if you have somebody wishing to come back from maternity leave, from wishing to work 5 days a week to 3 days a week, what can often happen is they get into job sharing. So I'll do Monday, Tuesday, Sally can do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and everybody's happy. So there's some typical examples of flexible working. It's not exhaustive, but that's what we mean when we talk about flexible working. Okay, Hannah, if you could just please move on. As I mentioned previously, you must deal requests in a reasonable manner. Brushing things under the carpet, treating things lightly is not legally acceptable. I'll come on to some of the penalties later, but they can be quite harsh. So you have a legal obligation to look at the flexible working requests in a reasonable manner. Just to remind you, we've talked about staff needing 26 weeks service before they can make a flexible request. We've mentioned there the need to put it in writing, and we've mentioned there that they can do that once every 12 months. So hopefully you will not be it will not be an avalanche of people saying, I wish to work in a flexible way, but when they do that, you have a legal obligation to do that in a reasonable manner. Okay. The second part, I want us to spend a little bit of time on there. You can refuse if there is a good reason, a good business reason for doing so. As I mentioned previously, you cannot say the management don't like it, it doesn't fit into our culture, the owners look down on that. There is 8 reasons, and 8 reasons only, why you can deny that. We'll go through that. The first reason is the burden of additional costs. If you have somebody saying, I wish to work in a flexible way, and you say we're going to have to engage a recruitment agency and they charge a fortune, we're going to have to ask other people at a financial premium on overtime to work extra hours. Financially, if the flexible working request is going to be a burden on your business, then you can refuse it. That's the first reason. The second reason is an inability to reorganize work amongst existing staff. If you have some kind of specialist department, if you have some specialist staff, and if they say, I wish to work flexibly, how easy is it for you to rearrange their work amongst other staff? And if the answer is it isn't, and we've tried and we've failed, or we don't have that skill, we don't have that experience, that's another reason to refuse that flexible working request. The third reason, and again, don't worry about writing these things down, it will be there in the recording and it will be there in the notes. If you've got an inability to recruit additional staff, If, for argument's sake, you're a care home and you have an employee that says, I wish to work flexibly, I wish to leave an hour early on Sunday, then you'll say, well, how on earth can I recruit one person for 1 hour to work on a Sunday? And that's a good reason to refuse it. The next reason is a detrimental impact on quality. If you've somebody that's saying, I'm a manager of a department, or I'm a customer-facing manager, I wish to work 2 days a week, then there's an argument of our customers are going to suffer because you're not there, and we failed all the other issues of a replacement. So therefore, we're going to refuse on the detrimental impact on quality. And to be honest with you, that's one that we see fairly often. If your business is going to suffer, if your clients are going to suffer, that's a genuine reason why you can turn down a flexible working request. Okay, the next one is a detrimental impact on performance. It's fairly obvious. It does what it says on the tin. If it's going to have a significant impact on an employee's ability to work, then absolutely not. The next one is a detrimental impact on the ability to meet customer demand. If you are a restaurant, you are busy Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights, an employee says, I wish to work Mondays and Tuesdays lunchtime only, then clearly you can't meet customer demand. And likewise, insufficient work for the periods of the employee proposes to work. Again, if you're a restaurant and you say, I'd like staff to work Monday, Tuesday, lunchtime, or your employees say, I would like to work Monday, Tuesday, lunchtime, there is no trade. You're trying to work at a point where there is no demand, there is no work to be done. And the final one is a planned structural change to the business. If you're going through a restructure, if you're going through a redundancy, these are good reasons to refuse a flexible working request. While I'm mentioning this, I've given you the headlines. If you're clients of ours, that's fantastic. Please use the advice line. We run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. These are legal reasons you can refuse. So it's important that you contact us, chat through the reasons why you're going to reject a flexible working request. If we help you, if we advise at every stage, and we refuse, and quite a lot of the time we do refuse flexible working requests on genuine reasons, for clients with insurance, you're insured. We carry the risk and not you. So that's an important reason that you involve us from the get-go. It always gets me a little bit nervous doing webinars because I'm kind of giving scattergun advice, I'm giving broad brush advice. The devil is always in the detail. So if you have a flexible working request, you are clients of ours, give us a call and let's talk it on a targeted basis. If you're not clients of ours, clearly I'm biased, I'd like you to become clients of ours. But if you're not clients of ours and don't want to be clients of ours, for whatever reason, I can't think of one, then please seek independent legal advice. It's important because it can cost you in tribunal, but more about that a little bit later. Okay, Hannah, if we could just zip on, please, to the next slide, to relevant case law. I promised you I was going to zip through these next couple of slides or so because it's case law. If you are ever awake at night, please read some case law. It will send you straight back to sleep. I'm not going to touch on this. The first thing is the first bit of case law. The only word to take out of the sentence is the right to request flexible working. Okay, there's no automatically right to work flexibly. So if you have an employee to say, I demand that from my maternity comeback, I am going to work Thursday, Friday, Saturday only, there is no automatically right to that. There's only a right to request it. So that bit of case law just emphasised that your employees have a legal right to request case law and not, again, to demand it. So that's that bit. The next case, the British Airways case, again, I'm not going to spend any time on that because you all lead busy lives, but that was always about sex discrimination. British Airways, again, it was a pilot, female pilot. She was refused to work less hours on the grounds that she should be working the same hours as everybody else. And she pointed out that it was indirect sex discrimination. Females get pregnant, males don't. She was a lady coming back from maternity leave, and therefore if they just refused it out of hand, it was automatically discriminatory on the grounds of sex. If they'd have investigated it properly, and if they'd have given a detailed outcome, it would have stopped that nasty case. So those two bits of case law. If you are kind of want to take that further, then I can chat in more detail kind of offline, but I am aware that case law is turns people off quite quickly. So move on to the next slide, and I'll zip through this one as well. Okay, the reason that we've brought this one to your attention is basically because the judge had no power to interfere with the employer's business decision. So again, I'm not going to go into much depth because I've got one eye on the clock, but Ms. Smith brought a flexible working request. Her employer gave a number of reasons, okay, why it was refused. She went to tribunal and said that the business was acting irrationally. And the judgment was that the judge is not allowed to put himself in the managing director's shoes. He cannot make decisions on behalf of the company. All he can do is to see if the business has behaved properly, it's considered it, and it's rejected again on one of the 8 issues we've previously talked about. It is not there to say, well, Ms. Smith, your employer was good, bad, or indifferent on their outcome. It will look at the legal test only and will not put themselves into the managing director's shoes. Okay, so let's look at the next slide for treating flexible working requests seriously. I mentioned previously we do need to look at them. If you have a flexible working request, and we mentioned it needs to be in writing, the first thing is to give us a call here at Morpay. The reason we do that is because of King and Tesco Stores PLC. I'm not going to take you through that slide. It's there for anybody that wishes to review that slide at a later date. But basically, Tesco had a flexible working request. Tesco did not look at it very seriously, didn't handle it correctly, didn't handle it in a timely manner. It took them 4.5 months to conclude. If you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast that you've got 3 months you can delay it. Tesco used 4.5 months. So here, King launched a tribunal, and bearing in mind, tribunals do not cost the employer anymore or employee anymore. They are free. You can do, your employees can do it online. But he launched a tribunal. He was still in employment. He didn't leave Tesco, and because they didn't look at his flexible working request in a timely manner, he was awarded 8 weeks' pay. 8 weeks' pay, 2 months' pay. So if you don't address it in a relatively quick manner, a relatively timely manner, the tribunal can come hard on you. Bear in mind, this person did not leave Tesco. They were employed at all times. The judge effectively fined Tesco 8 weeks' wages and gave them straight to the employee. So it's important, if you have a flexible working request, don't just think, oh, I'll get round and deal with that someday. You have a legal obligation, a legal duty, or otherwise you may find yourself in tribunal. And believe me, from somebody that's spent many hours in there are never nice places to be in. So if you have a flexible working request, deal it in a timely manner. Okay, so Hannah, if we could just move on now to the business benefits of flexible working. Hopefully I haven't scared you too much about flexible working, because it can actually benefit your business. As you can see from the 4 round circles on the bottom of your screen right now, the first one is recruitment and retention. Flexible working can attract staff. We're in an incredibly competitive labour market at the moment. For clients out there or people that are not clients out there, you'll be fully aware of the difficulties of recruiting. If you're struggling to pay top dollar, the upper quartile of the pay structure, if you're struggling to pay the wages that the larger companies can pay, then it can be an absolute godsend if you're there to say, look, we can pay not only market money, decent money, but we can also work in a flexible way that will fit around your lifestyle. You'll get the best talent. The second of all, increases productivity. I mentioned before, and I will mention it again, because it's important that if people work in a flexible way, they do not work less hard. So if you have people that are home workers, If you don't have distractions, i.e. people saying, did you watch Netflix last night? Did you watch the Rugby World Cup last night? You can actually increase productivity. It's important as HR professionals that you look at that and you make sure that there is no drop-off and ideally productivity gains when you work in a flexible way. The third one reduces stress and fatigue. Yeah, we've everybody's had the mornings where you thought, oh, I've got that terrible meeting today, I've got that terrible client to see today. If you can work in a flexible way, actually you will have happier staff. I promise you, and which nicely brings me on to the final one, is it will reduce absence. If you have staff work in a way that fits in with their lifestyle, but also fits in with your business, then you will see absenteeism decline. It's not just me saying that. There is actual research to say that if you can fit round your productivity and if you can fit round your employees' lifestyle, they'll come to work happier, they'll come to work healthier. So actually it can be a benefit from your business. Don't think if staff are saying, I want to work in a flexible way, that they're going to work less hard, less committed, less able. It's not. It can be the reverse of that. And if it's not, then we can get on to other more punitive methods of disciplinary, etc. But ultimately, working from home should increase your business benefits and not decrease your business benefits. Okay, Hannah, if we can just gently move on. Okay, it's not all plain sailing. I'm not here to tell you this morning that flexible working is an absolute dream and everything's wonderful. It can give you as a business some little headaches. So we've talked about the benefits. Let's talk about some negative issues now. First of all, operational pressures. We all have clients that drop things on us at the last minute. We all have people that want to bounce things off each other at the desk. If you have a way of working that's not mainstream to your competitors, that's not mainstream to your customers, it can be impractical to allow flexible working in some industries and some work environments. So if you are in the care industry, clearly you can't have home workers. If you're in the education industry, you're going to struggle with home workers. So there can be operational pressures. The second of all, managing flexible workers. If people are at home, if people are remote, if people are working when their management team are not working, they can be difficult to manage. I mentioned previously, we have software. You can get hardware to monitor output, email volumes, call volumes, spreadsheet volumes, keystroke indicators. These are all perfectly acceptable tools to use, but it is fair to say that if somebody's working 150 miles away, they are more difficult to kind of manage than if staff are working at the other side of the office. Difficulty in making value judgments. What do we mean by that? Previously, people could make flexible working requests on childcare basis. People could work flexible working requests on disabled children basis. That has now gone. So if I said to my manager, I wish to have Thursday afternoons off for golf lessons, he may think, well, that's absolutely crazy, I'm going to refuse it. By the way, I don't play golf, and that's probably why I need lessons. But no, those days have gone of childcare and disabled children and disabled kind of adults have long gone. Anybody can make a flexible working request on whatever basis they want. If they say, I want to work from home because the commute's too difficult, that may or may not be true, but you're not making value judgments. You're making purely business reasons on the basis of the outcome. So don't say, well, this guy needs time off to look for his children, or that guy needs time off for golf lessons. Whatever the reasons, no, you'll base it purely on business reasons, not individuals' reasons. And finally, cohesiveness of the team. I work, as I've mentioned previously, I work in employment law. Anybody that tells you that the ultimate expert in employment law or any other employment law is a liar. What we like to do at Morpay is just bounce things off each other. I've got this scenario. I think this applies. Do you agree? And it's often useful because every day is a school day where we can bounce things off the team here at Morpay or the employment law team at Morpay. And it's likewise in your industry. If you've got your employees scattered the full length of the United Kingdom, how much teamwork are you actually getting? Have you got people working in silos, or have you got people that are working as a team, that are talking to each other, that are distributing problems, distributing answers to each other? Just be mindful of that if you wouldn't mind. Okay, right. Okay, if we could now just please move on.
So before we move on to the Q&A session, I was just wanting to touch on payroll and TNA and how flexible working can impact this. So while flexible working requests do sit with HR, it's also important to think about how this affects other parts of your business and also what tools there are to make it easier to manage flexible working within your organisation. If all employees are working the same number of hours each week, it's fairly straightforward to spot payroll errors. However, when you have employees working part-time, job sharing, flexi-time, compressed hours, etc., it can quickly become more complex, and it's important for HR and payroll to work closely together. In addition, it can be very time-consuming manually collecting, calculating and processing the number of hours employees are working, and time and attendance systems can help you save time and also improve payroll calculation accuracy. So these were just two of the things that we wanted to flag to you when you're thinking about implementing flexible working and the best ways of managing flexible working. We will now move on to the Q&A session. I know I've seen a few questions come through already, so we will make a start on the questions. Bear with me 1 second. So the first question we've got has come from Claire. She's asked, I have recently recruited a new starter and they have said that they'd like Thursdays off as they have to look after their grandchildren on that day. Do I have to allow this?
Little bit of a double-barreled question, that one. Let me explain the reasons why. First of all, currently, absolutely not. If they are a new starter, they need 26 weeks employment, 6 months employment before they're allowed to make a flexible working request. So the answer is no. The reason I mentioned it's a little bit of a double-barreled question is there's currently legislation coming through that gives grandparents extra rights. So right now, absolutely not. What's going to come through, our legislators have been tied up dealing with, I won't mention the word because we all know it, our government have been tied up with a big project, I'll leave it at that. So therefore it's been delayed, but soon grandparents will have extra employment rights. But Claire, right now, no, just point out that if they don't have 6 months service, they're not allowed to make that request.
Brilliant, thank you, Carl. Moving on to the next question. This question has come from Ben and he's asked, I have had a flexible working request for home working, and if I grant this, then I am worried that others will want to do this too. What should I do?
Okay, Ben. First of all, I'm going to use a phrase that my mother would use, and it's called first up, best dressed. If somebody makes a flexible working request and you grant it, and somebody else makes another one in a couple of weeks' time, what you can do is say, look, there's been a detrimental impact on quality of granting it you, or a cost burden, or one of the 8 reasons that I mentioned about. And again, if Ben, I don't know who you are, but if you're client of ours, please call me. But if one person is granted it, it does not make everybody else have the same rights of them granting it. So you can refuse it to say that we granted it for Joe Bloggs. We're going to refuse it for you because there is a detrimental impact on quality, additional cost burden, you want to work when there is no work for you to do, it can be rejected. So I wouldn't worry about somebody saying, well, he had it and therefore I should have it.
Thank you, Carl. We've had a few questions come through actually in relation to working from home. We've also had a question from Sarah and she's asking, how would you handle a situation where you are aware there is a young child at home when an employee is working from home?
Absolutely not is the answer to that. If somebody's got a child at home, that's fine, but there must be adequate childcare. You are paying that person to work. You're not paying that person to work 75% of the time and do childcare 25% of the time. If you have some concerns that productivity may drop off because they'll be doing childcare duties, then you are perfectly within your rights to address that. And you need assurances that is there another adult in that home that can look after that child. It is not, I said previously, and I'll say it again, working from home is not a euphemism for working less hard. It is working from home. And if you've got issues with, well, that person's not going to be working because they'll be doing childcare duties, you're perfectly within your rights to address that.
Thank you, Cal. We've also had a few questions that have come through around the 26 weeks before being able to make a request for flexible working. Margaret and Daniel have actually asked quite similar questions, so I'll group these two together. Margaret has asked, is there ever a situation when you can consider flexible working where the employee has been with the business for less than 26 weeks? And then Daniel has also asked, if you've got an employee and they've worked with the business for more than 4 months, left and then returned in the same year, would you then need to start that again? Or because they previously worked there, would they automatically be able to request that flexible working straight away?
Sure. If the employment has been severed, i.e. P45, holiday paid, and then they come back certainly not within a couple of weeks, but longer than that, the clock goes back to 0. So the 6 months start ticking again. And to the other question about can we allow less than 26 weeks? You can. You can allow whatever you want because you're certainly doing kind of more generous than the law, but the danger is you've set precedents. If you allow one person at 2 months worth of working to request flexible working, then expect a knock on the door from other people saying the same with the same service, and unless you grant them that same right, then they may claim some form of discrimination. But yeah, you can certainly allow less than that. That's maybe good practice. That's maybe desirable, but just be aware that you may have let the floodgates open.
Thank you, John. We've got time for probably just maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So we've had a question from Lucy, and she's asked, when you say it's a permanent change to contract, does that work both ways? So could you have, say, a 3 to 6 month trial period, or does it have to be all or nothing?
You could have a trial period, but you've got to define what success and failure looks like. The danger is you say to an employee, we'll agree to work in a flexible style, and we'll agree a 3-month trial. That's fine to do, that's perfect to do, but the danger is at 3 months' time, your employee thinks this is fabulous, this is wonderful, this is working. The danger is you as the employer thinking this is an absolute nightmare, it's not working. So if you're going to do a trial, and legally you can do a trial, but you have to define what success and failure looks like, i.e. 2 hours on the telephone every day, 25 emails done every day, 6 customers dealt with every day. Please define what success and failure looks like, and then you can hold them to account in 3 months' time.
Brilliant, thank you, Carl. Right, but we've just got time for one last question. We've got a question from Mike, and he's said, can you delay a decision beyond 26 weeks if a request is made by someone on maternity leave who is not returning to work for, say, another 7 months?
Yeah, it's often, we get this now and again. What will happen is a lady will give birth, have a baby, and then immediately make decisions about flexible working. As I mentioned previously, you can make one request every 12 months. So if somebody has 7 months on maternity leave before they're back in employment, unless you have a crystal ball, you don't know what your business looks like in 7 months. Which customers are you going to gain? Which customers are you going to lose? Which markets are you going to develop in? So if somebody says, I wish to make a flexible working request now for 7 months later, my advice would be, are you really sure? Because if it's rejected, it's going to be another 12 months before you can make another one. So why don't you make a flexible working request at the end of your maternity leave, and we'll deal with it via keep in touch days, or right at the end of your maternity leave, because we don't know as a business where we're going to be in 7 months' time. So if you make it now, The danger is that it'll be rejected because we don't know what the business is going to look like in 7 months' time, and therefore you've locked yourself out of another request until 12 months. So why, rather than make it now, why don't you make your flexible working request in 6.5 months' time from now, when we know where we're going to be in 7 months now? 7 months from now, and therefore the outcome will reflect the needs of the business rather than right now where we're kind of staring into a crystal ball.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Carl. That was really useful. Thank you to everyone that asked questions as well. I think that will have been valuable for everyone on the webinar. So moving on just to a few more slides before we close the webinar off. If you'd like to read more about the research findings I discussed at the beginning of the webinar, you can download a copy of the Engaged Employer Report. It includes a number of case studies that demonstrate examples of flexible working, so I think you will definitely find it an interesting read. And in terms of connecting with MorePay, there's a whole host of additional content on our website, which includes our monthly employment law and HR legislation guide, which is located in the resources section of our website. And if you follow us on any of our social sites, we publish all of our new blogs and guides on there, so you'll see them flash up on your newsfeed. As mentioned, we will send you a copy of the slides and also a recording of the webinar so that you've got that to refer back to. I do hope that you found the webinar useful this morning. Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much to Carl for hosting the webinar today. We'll close the webinar off now, and I hope you have a brilliant day. Thank you.